My family laughed when I arrived at Thanksgiving in a borrowed coat, driving a car that rattled like a tin can. For 10 years, my brothers called me the family charity case, a broke artist who couldn't even afford her own health insurance. They took turns mocking my life choices over expensive wine, completely unaware that the ragged canvas tote bag on my shoulder held a printout that would turn their faces completely white. When my oldest brother casually tossed a $100 bill at my feet and told me to buy a real dinner for once, I finally reached into that bag. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just quietly unlocked my phone, logged into my institutional wealth management account, and slid the screen across the table. The laughter died instantly. If you want to see how the family failure ended up owning their mortgages, stick around until the end. My name is Callista. In a family that measured human worth by the crispness of a luxury suit and the weight of a corporate title, I was always considered the broken gear in a machine of perfection. My father was a commercial real estate developer, and my two older brothers, Pierce and Vance, followed directly in his footsteps. Pierce was 40, sharp-edged, and wore his arrogance like armor, while Vance, 2 years younger, hid his cruelty behind expensive watches and a patronizing smile. They looked at the world as a ladder to be climbed by stepping on anyone underneath them. And for as long as I could remember, the person at the very bottom of that ladder was me. While they went to elite business schools and took out multi-million-dollar loans to finance high-risk ventures, I chose a quiet path. I was a textile designer, spending my days working with natural dyes and hand-weaving fabrics in a small, rented studio. To my family, this wasn't an art form. It was a pathetic, low-paying hobby. Every single family dinner was a calculated exercise in humiliation. Pierce would loudly discuss his latest commercial acquisitions. Vance would brag about his international investments, and then they would both turn their eyes toward me, asking if I had finally managed to make enough rent money this month. I tolerated it for years, staying quiet, smiling through the condescension, and letting them believe exactly what they wanted to believe about the family failure. What my brothers didn't realize was that while they were busy building a house of cards financed by mounting corporate debt, I was quietly building an empire. 5 years ago, while experimenting in my studio, I developed a specialized, highly durable, eco-friendly fabric manufacturing process. I didn't brag about it, and I certainly didn't ask my family for advice. Instead, I quietly secured the global patents. 14 months later, a massive international luxury conglomerate took notice. They didn't just want to use the fabric. They wanted exclusive rights to the entire patent line. When the acquisition deal finally closed, the initial wire transfer into my newly established institutional wealth account was staggering. I watched, completely detached, as 8 figures landed safely in my balance. But instead of immediately buying a mansion or a sports car to throw in my brothers' faces, I made a very deliberate choice. I decided to change absolutely nothing about my outward life. I kept my modest rented studio, I continued driving my old reliable sedan, and I wore the same simple hand-woven clothes. I did this partly because I genuinely loved my simple, creative peace, but mostly because I wanted to see exactly how far Pierce and Vance would go with their cruelty when they believed I was completely defenseless. For 3 full years, I let them look down on me, silently collecting every single piece of data on their true characters while my wealth quietly multiplied in the dark. The annual family reunion dinner was held at a sprawling high-end estate in the hills, a place Pierce had recently rented just to showcase his supposed dominance. The air inside was thick with the scent of expensive catering and suffocating vanity. As soon as I walked through the door wearing a simple dark green dress I'd woven myself, the unspoken judgment shifted into high gear. Pierce and Vance stood by the limestone fireplace, swirling vintage wine in crystal glasses, flanked by their equally status-conscious wives. "Look who made it," Vance smirked, adjusting his platinum watch. "We were worried your car wouldn't make it up the driveway, Callista." The room rippled with polite, cruel laughter. Throughout the multi-course dinner, the conversation remained a battlefield of grandstanding. Pierce bragged about his latest high-rise project, while Vance dropped his new beachfront property, deliberately pausing to ask if I needed their accountant's number to help optimize my meager studio taxes. Then came the turning point. Pierce leaned back, his eyes gleaming with artificial benevolence. You know, Vance and I were talking. We're updating our estate planning, and we're thinking of establishing a small, monthly trust for you. Nothing major, just enough so you don't have to worry about basic groceries when your little art phase inevitably burns out. The condescension was heavy, designed to cement my status as the permanent family charity case in front of 20 relatives. They smiled warmly, basking in their own performative generosity, completely unaware that the heavy canvas tote bag resting against my chair held a reality that would utterly destroy their carefully constructed world. The psychological suffocating atmosphere of the room reached its absolute breaking point right after the dessert was served. Pierce, clearly fueled by the expensive wine and his own bloated ego, decided that verbal humiliation simply wasn't enough for his entertainment tonight. He reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out a crisp, black leather wallet, and extracted a single crisp $100 bill. With a slow, theatrical flick of his wrist, he tossed the money directly across the table. It fluttered through the air and landed flatly right next to my dessert plate. "Go buy yourself a real dinner for once, Callista," he said, his voice dripping with a patronizing amusement that made the entire table fall into a sudden, awkward silence. Vance chuckled softly, nodding his head in agreement, while their wives looked away with thin, satisfied smirks. I didn't flinch. I didn't let a single tear form in my eyes, and I didn't give them the satisfaction of raising my voice. Instead, I let my hand rest flat against the table, absorbing the cold reality of their complete disrespect. Before we move on to see exactly how their smug smiles completely vanished, I want to ask you a quick question. How would you handle toxic family members who constantly try to belittle your life choices? Do you walk away, or do you wait for the perfect moment to strike back? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I sat perfectly still, anchoring the entire room's attention, as I slowly reached into my canvas tote bag. I pulled out my phone, unlocked the screen, and opened the verified app for my private institutional wealth management account. The room remained completely silent, every eye fixed on me, expecting a tearful exit or a desperate defense. Instead, I quietly slid the phone across the polished mahogany table, right past the forgotten $100 bill, stopping it directly in front of Pierce. "I think you need this more than I do," I said softly. Pierce frowned, his brow furrowing with irritation as he looked down at the screen. For the first 2 seconds, his brain completely failed to process what he was seeing. Then, the blood completely drained from his face. His mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. Seeing his brother's sudden bizarre reaction, Vance leaned over, his smug smile still partially intact as he glanced down at the device. The change was instantaneous. Vance choked on his wine, coughing into his linen napkin as his eyes went wide with pure, unadulterated shock. The screen displayed a liquid cash balance of $14,800,000, held under the verified corporate title of my private holding company. Below that was a separate tab detailing an active portfolio of prime commercial real estate bonds. There was no shouting, no dramatic flair, and absolutely no gloating from my side. I simply sat back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap, and let the cold, indisputable numbers do all the heavy lifting. The high-earning, powerful brothers were suddenly reduced to 2 terrified men staring at a ghost. The heavy silence in the room was deafening as the sudden, desperate shift in their behavior began. The arrogant mockery that had defined my brothers for a decade instantly evaporated, replaced by stuttering, nervous excuses and an uncomfortable, frantic attempt at sudden, manipulative affection. Pierce cleared his throat, his voice shaking as he pushed my phone back across the table. "Callista, we had no idea. Why didn't you tell us you were experiencing this kind of success?" Vance nodded quickly, attempting a forced, defensive laugh. "Yeah, sis, we were just joking around earlier. You know how we are. We're family, we're proud of you." I looked at them, completely unmoved by their sudden realization, and decided it was time to drop the final hammer. "I didn't tell you because I wanted to see who you really were," I said smoothly, pulling a folded legal document from my tote bag. "And speaking of business, you should know that my holding company quietly acquired the secondary commercial debt notes for both of your major real estate developments last month." The color, which had barely started returning to their faces, vanished entirely. They were both drowning in mounting corporate debt and high-interest construction loans. By purchasing those heavily leveraged notes, I hadn't just revealed my wealth. I had quietly stepped into the position of their primary institutional creditor. I now held the legal keys to their financial survival, and the absolute panic in their eyes proved they knew exactly what that meant. The following week, I instructed my attorneys to enforce the strict legal terms of those notes, refusing to grant Pierce and Vance the special extensions they desperately begged for. I sold my position in their failing developments, packed up my studio, and moved to a peaceful coastal town where the air smells of salt and absolute freedom. I built a beautiful, state-of-the-art textile facility, employing local artisans and living completely on my own terms. My brothers were forced to liquidate their luxury assets just to avoid total bankruptcy, learning the hard way that true worth isn't measured by a watch or a loud mouth. If this story taught you that quiet success is always the ultimate revenge, please subscribe to the channel, click the like button, and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far my journey has reached.